want to talk just a little bit about how well gun control works. In light of everything that's just recently happened in France, and a lot of things that have just been happening not just in this country, but all over the world over the last couple of years, I think this is a discussion that needs to be had. Whether you're on the pro-gun side of things or the anti-gun side of things, you're probably at some point, and probably already have, found yourself in a conversation trying to defend your point of view. And I think it's important when you're doing that to have good common sense information so that what you're saying can be actually backed up by facts and common sense. In general, I want to use the example of France and everything that's happened because it is fresh, because people are paying attention to it, and those are the types of situations that really get people to think and discuss this type of topic. I mean, we've got to get it when it's fresh in people's minds so they remember it later on when they find themselves in a discussion about this. Now, surprisingly, I haven't heard a whole lot of people talking about gun control when it comes to everything that's happened in France, but it is a great example of how well gun control actually does work. So what we have happen in France, in case you didn't know, is 3 armed men were able to break into a secure building, a building that was on alert for just this type of thing because they had been threatened in the past. They had security. They were killed at least 1 police officer, 12 other people inside the building, and they injured countless others. They were able to do this with fully automatic AK-47s and a rocket-propelled grenade, an RPG. Okay, now these people we know were on a U.S. no-fly list. So on some level, our government knew they had at least ties to terrorism, or at least suspected ties. So we can assume that the French government knew this as well. Now these were French citizens. So the question becomes, how did people who have ties to terrorism, who committed a terrorist act, how were they able to get a hold of fully automatic AK-47s and an RPG? Well, we must assume that it's because France has extremely lax gun control laws, that they're pretty easy on letting citizens own firearms. We can only assume that because at this point, how else do you explain terrorists getting a hold of these types of firearms? I mean, it really doesn't make any sense unless they had free access to these types of firearms. Well, in fact, quite the opposite is true. France, even by European standards, has pretty strict gun control. Okay, they restrict a lot of types of firearms. You have to have permits. I mean, there's a whole list of things that go on when it comes to trying to own a gun in France. So why is it then, in a country that touts gun control as a way to protect its citizens, how are 3 suspected terrorists at the time, and now we know are full-blown terrorists, how are they allowed to get a hold of these firearms? Well, the answer is simple and it's rooted in common sense. Bad guys, terrorists, people who are by definitions criminals and evil men do not care about gun laws. This is just something that's been going on for thousands of years. Bad guys, criminals do not obey the law. They simply don't. So the only thing that is affected by gun control, by more gun regulations, more gun restrictions, more gun laws, are law-abiding citizens, people who are going to obey the law anyway. It's not going to affect the people who are premeditating this type of action, or maybe not even something this bad. Maybe it's just a simple mugging, in an alleyway. These people are criminals, and by definition, they don't care about the law. They are bad guys. They're evil. They're terrorists. They do not care if somebody tells them they cannot own something. Whatever their tool of choice is, whether it's a gun, a knife, or a pipe bomb, as we've seen evidence time and time again, these people will get their hands on what they need to do the evil things they want to do. This is just basic common sense, and anybody that argues otherwise is an idiot. It doesn't make sense to argue a point that has been proven time and time again to be wrong. And that's the point I'm trying to make here, guys. Gun control does not work because criminals do not pay attention to the law. What we saw happen in France is the perfect example of this. These are 3 people who we already suspected to have ties to terrorism, living in a country that has highly restricted gun laws, and they were still able to get a hold of AK-47s and an RPG. People, what more proof do you really need that gun control doesn't work?